Hello, I'm Alex Blandford. I'm coming to you to talk about why you can't API your way out of politics. It doesn't sound like it's going to fit in with the others, but it really does. I'm here with two hats, as ever, regular viewers will know. Public Digital, who run this lovely event. I'm a principal consultant at Oxford University. I'm a DPhil student. I'm a part-time DPhil student. Do not be a part-time DPhil student while you try and work for Public Digital, or indeed any other public sector organisation. It's a very silly idea. 7 years in, at some point, this will be submitted. I am an anthropologist, so we're talking about data. We're talking about data that came from me sitting around and drinking beer and eating dinner with people. So it's data, but it's not really the way we usually talk about data here. So just bear that in mind. I work with radicalised nerds. They had a process. I work with civic technology organisations. You'll have heard of them. mySociety, who presented a couple of weeks ago. Democracy Club, who run polling station finders for the Electoral Commission, because in the grand tradition of things like Hansard, you build something on the outside and gradually it becomes nationalised by the back door. And people like Full Fact, who have also presented recently. They've all been radicalised by things not being good enough and then thinking, well, I should really have a go at fixing that, which is a great sentiment. And so I want to talk to you about the stack. Sometimes you'll see it sort of like this. You'll have had some expensive data consultant come in and talk to you about this, that you have data at the bottom, information, knowledge, wisdom. It works slightly differently in the civic tech space. So you have a messy mixture of just crap at the bottom. You have some thankless bunch who are spending their lives, their evenings, their weekends, moulding that into something vaguely usable. And then, from doing that, government will suddenly be better. And we've really struggled with the question mark. How do you turn lots of civic enthusiasm, lots of people who really want to get involved, into a bunch of people who actually change the system and make it so that, as we were just talking about, how do you get beyond one set of numbers that are a target? How do you get beyond dashboarditis? It's difficult. I've asterisked that. I think the closest is actually Full Fact, because they're the only ones who really come to an argumentation layer. They take data and they go, this says this thing, and they say it even if it's inconvenient for a politician. Because there's a problem if you publish data and then you spend your time going, well, actually, this shows that these politicians are liars, or that this political thing that I like is proved by these numbers. It decreases the kind of apoliticalness of the data that you publish, or at least the contention is that it does. So you have civic tech organisations that do try and sit in this space. But with the greatest of respect to friends in Full Fact, I don't think they fixed the internet's misinformation problem. In fact, it has got worse on their watch, and I lay this charge at Andy Duffield's feet and Meaven and all the rest of them. Anyway, not their fault. Bless them for trying. And I think as well, people from within civic technology end up in government. You know, how many people in early government digital service spaces came from these? Most of them. And it tricks you. It tricks you into thinking that you are next to the Prime Minister. You go for a meeting in number 10, you pat Larry, and you go, I've made it. I'm making decisions. You might notice a younger man in the background there. I was, not the Duke behind. I was young once, and I sat in Parliament thinking, I'm making decisions. This matters, and it doesn't. That's what tricks you, is that, I don't know if anyone did A-level politics, but you might remember it's A-level government and politics. The two things are quite separate. So one of my big sort of pieces that I look at in my research is the journey from 2010 to now. And those of us of this vintage that still had a bit more hair might remember armchair auditors. They were Eric Pickles' army of civic tech nerds who were going to go through all of this data and say, here is where the waste is. Here is where the government is falling to pieces. So that's just 8th of July 2011. 9th of November 2012, it had already stopped working as far as BBC News was concerned. In fact, even by 2015, friend of open government Ben Worthy was able to write an article going, this didn't work on quite a few levels. And one of the things he kind of points out, and that if you stop and think about it for a few minutes, is that the incentives were misaligned. We have a bunch of civic technologists working on how do we change the system, how do we make government open, how do we make government transparent, and how do we do things, and perhaps how do we create data sets without a purpose that might just be useful in the future. And on the other side you have, how do we cut the state back to its core through austerity. You had a political project, and those two things were orthogonal to each other. They had very much misaligned incentives. I will also kind of, for those of us with a long memory, 2011, 2012, most of the sort of civic tech things that you could go to have a free beer and play around with some government data were usually sponsored by the Taxpayers Alliance, which also perhaps brings a little bit of a show of what the political incentives for people funding this were. And so my thing from the last 15 years is open data doesn't change politics. We've done open data. It's been rolled back. It hasn't changed. It didn't change how the Conservatives thought about it. It didn't change how the Lib Dems thought about it. It is not changing how Labour thinks about it. We've had some successes, but they've come in the service of other policy goals. They are not in and of them. This is not in and of itself. Open data, open government is not in and of itself a policy position that any of the major parties sign up to, support, salute on a flagpole. They're political positions, big P political. They're not. This isn't technocratic reform. And the mistake civic technologists have made over the last 15 years is imagining that this can just be kind of just shuffled in, that we can just do we can do a GDS over here, we can have an arm's length open data institute over here, and that will change the tenor of how British government deals with data in the public space. And it won't, and it hasn't. So, for the next 10 years, this is my manifesto for what you should be doing. Start a civic tech project. We haven't had any good new ones for about 10 years now, and that's obviously because the good ones are all taken, but have a go. If you think of something that you haven't, that's really annoying you, and you speak to another data friend you have around this room is a very good place, and two of you agree, start something. It might work. Work in an NGO, because eventually all civic tech projects become an NGO, so you may as well just sort of cut out the middleman and go and work straight for one that's going to deal with data. But lastly, with my last 10 seconds, join a political party. I don't really mind which one at this stage, your preference, but the only way that open data and open government are going to be part of some manifesto in 10 years' time, or 5 years' time if we're very lucky, is if they believe in it and they see the benefits of it, and that convincing point did not come from a civil servant or a civic activist from the outside. Anyway, if you want to shout at me about my academic opinions, that's me. If you want to shout about me about my work opinions, that's me. And for everything else, blue sky down there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.